Welcome to the NXTGEN Show. My name is Benjamin Brain, and it's my mission to share with you the stories, experiences, and insights of accomplished next generation leaders from family businesses around the UK. Now, on today's show, I was joined by Ben Wilson, Managing Director at MPM. Now, MPM are an award-winning Leeds-based manufacturer and supplier of composite and fiberglass tooling and products. The business was launched by Ben's dad back in 1978, who retired in 2010, when alongside his two brothers, Ben took over the running of the business and has since taken it to great new heights, increasing revenue by over 700%. But that's not come without its challenges. Back in 2018, their 40th anniversary year, a devastating fire ripped through the factory and burned it to the ground. To come back from that, only then to be hit by the challenges brought about by coronavirus, which impacted so many businesses. But as you'll find from this interview, resilience is part of the DNA at MPM. And Ben and the team always find a way to come back bigger and better. This was another brilliant business interview with an inspirational next generation leader. So without further ado, let's get into it. This is Ben Wilson. Okay, so joined by Ben Wilson, Managing Director at MPM this morning. Ben, thank you so much for taking some time out to share your own journey with us on the NXTGEN Show.
Pleasure, Ben.
So I always like to start these interviews by taking it back in time and just asking you for a bit of context about how MPM first got started. I know it was your father that started the business a few decades back now in 1978, but what was the driver behind your father starting the business in the first place?
I think for me, Dad, he's always been a competitive soul, and I think he'd served his apprenticeship back when an apprenticeship was 7 years. So he'd worked in a foundry and a pattern shop there, and then he went off and did some in GRP pattern making, and I think. Like many people, at times he felt underappreciated, and eventually, they got to a point where the breaking point was sort of almost sod this, I'll have a go myself, and I think at that point in time, he'd probably just sort of almost bought himself a job, so he set up MPM and. It was him and one other chap called Phil Burnley. Alan, who remained with us for many years, started as an apprentice, and I think he basically just dug his heels in and said, right, I can have a go at this myself.
What if I was to ask you what MPM is known for? Like, how would you describe the core of what you do?
I suppose it's evolved over the years, but fundamentally, if it's a glass reinforced plastic or fiberglass or composite, there's sort of many things it's known as. But if it's something that's produced from fiberglass, if it's moldable, we can make it. So we do molds and tooling for other companies, which supports their production lines, and then we also take products from design and concept through to molding, and then provide parts for the leisure industry. So anything from shower pods for caravans, pizza ovens, bath panels, shower tray molds. We're just starting out on a project for renewable energy for a battery energy storage unit, sewage tanks, water tanks. So there's a fairly wide and varied range of things.
Yeah, sounds like enough to keep it interesting, definitely.
Yeah.
So going back to 1978, obviously it's a bit presumptuous to ask the question in the first place, but how old were you when you first started the business?
I was 4.
Okay, so I suppose it's quite a long time ago to sort of ask the question around, can you remember like a difference or a shift from when your dad had been employed to moving towards being self-employed? Did you notice anything even back when you were 4 that you would pick up on as a young kid?
Probably not so much with my dad, because he's always been, like I say, anybody that knows me knows I'm competitive. So fundamentally, if there's, you know, if there's a podium, I don't see any point in aiming to be on the third step. I'd want to be on the first one. And I think with my dad's drive and ambition, whether he was working for somebody else or working for himself, he always gave 100%. And I think, and for that reason, I don't think would have seen much change.
Yeah.
You know, back then, you know, I was what, 3.5, 4 years old. Dylan will have been 18 months, 2 years old.
Okay.
So it's one of those moments in life that for all our differences, which I'm sure some of your questions will raise, I always admire my dad at that point, because it must have taken some guts and belief in himself, and two, I've no idea how he convinced my mum.
Okay.
So, you know, if I look back to my own children being 4 years old and 2 years old, if I went to my wife and said, I've got this really crackers idea that I'm going to leave my job and security of getting a wage each week or month, and I'm going to throw it all at having a go myself. You know, Lorna's quite risk averse at times, so she'd have gone, no, you're not. And that would have probably been it. That was that. So for my dad to do that at that point, and he'd be the first to say that he worked hard, and you know, I know the old cliche of work smarter, not harder, but my dad worked hard and he worked smart, but he would be the first to say that he didn't set MPM up as Alan Sugar or to be an entrepreneurial spirit. He did it because he wanted to deliver quality products and a quality service, and fundamentally that's how it grew initially in the early stages, because people just heard he did a good job.
Yeah, and clearly it was a risk that paid off for him.
Yeah, I think it did. You might ask my mum sometimes and she might disagree, but you know, I don't think he'd have known any other way, and it created levels of anxiety that he probably didn't need sometimes. It's not easy running a business. You know, yes, there are benefits to it, and yes, there are rewards. But you know, in essence, he earned a very good living. He was clever in where he invested, and he's living a nice retirement now, and you know, fingers crossed he's signed sunshine right now in Spain.
Nice. Okay, so what age were you, Ben, when you first joined the business?
I was 18.
Okay. What had you been doing up to then?
I did school as normal. Never particularly liked school, but never really bunked off either, because I couldn't be bothered with aggro off my mum. And then I was asked to go back and do A levels, but I just didn't fancy. I didn't like school up to age of 16, so I really didn't see. And I did speak to the teacher that asked me to go back, and I just said, look, unfortunately, I've not enjoyed school up to now, really. So I think it'll just be a waste of 2 years, because I can't see me enjoying the next 2 years. I've had up to 16 as a trial run, and I've not really enjoyed it. So I ended up going to a company in Skipton called Fiberglass, and I can't remember how, but I ended up doing a week's work experience. And I'd worked on the shop floor for quite a few years in school holidays at MPM. So I knew how manufacturing worked. I knew how to put a shift in. And by the end of the week, the managing director at the time, called John Crossland, it's too long ago to get him in trouble now, but I'm sure you weren't meant to give people money, but he put 30 quid in an envelope, which don't sound much now, but in 1991 to a kid, effectively, it were quite a lot. Plus, he said, if you ever want a job, you've just done your interview, so give me a ring.
Nice. So you didn't go straight into what was MPM at the time then? Was that something that was on your mind, you know, with your father having the business? did you always sort of feel that your destiny would be here, or did you want to go out there and sort of create your own path? Did you have eyes on other careers?
No, I can't. I'd love to dress it up some other way, but I was probably going into work with my dad from probably 8 or 9 years old.
Yeah.
And my earliest sort of recollection has been about sort of 10 years old, thinking I'm going to run this place one day and I'm going to do a better job than you, Dad. and that isn't meant disrespectfully. That's just because if we were on BMXs at that time in our lives, I still wanted to beat my dad, and my dad still wanted to beat me, and I've zero issue with that. You know, some people will be like, "Oh, you should let your kids win," blah blah blah. I won't bother, because it set me a benchmark, and I would go for that whether I were on a BMX or running a business. So at the time, you know, effectively, I idolized my dad. So at that point in time, why would I not look at the business and think, I want to take that further one day, Dad?
Yeah. So for you, it was clear cut. You were going to be joining MPM, and when you were there, you were going to be taking it to new levels one day.
Yeah, I think so. And I think Fiberlight just happened to be an opportunity that came along. And again, I started at Fiberlight, and I was 16 years old. And I think going onto a shop floor in 1991, at 16, you were probably expected that you were going to be the whipping boy, and you were going to be sent for a tin of tartan paint or any other standing jokes. Whereas, I knew how a shop floor worked, and it's probably why I'd always struggled to cut sarcastic wit out of my life, because I enjoyed the crack and the banter on a shop floor. But at Fiberlight at the time, it was sort of, probably for some of the older guys, they didn't like a 16-year-old standing up for himself.
Now, you've already mentioned one thing in terms of your competitive spirit, and obviously that served you well and I know you're not a fan of titles and hierarchy, but essentially being the managing director of a successful company. You've talked about the fact that you weren't necessarily, you know, an academic, you weren't interested in furthering your education career. But when you look back now, can you see any other signs or traits in your younger self that would have given some sort of indication to the fact that you would be, you know, successful as a managing director of a family-run business?
I suppose so, on a sort of minor level almost, you know. And it's even just sprung to mind now. I actually went off with one of the guys that worked at MPM, and I can't remember, I were at middle school, so probably 11 or 12, and he knew this fantastic conker tree. Okay. So how we ended up, or why we ended up going with Mark, and he was almost, well, it makes you wonder why my dad let me go, because his nickname were Empty Head. But you know, I still remember that day and going, and we got hundreds of conkers. So me and my brother Dylan went back to middle school the following week and sold the conkers. And when it came to winter, my dad, as any manufacturer, you always aim for a high right first time, and you don't like making scrap. But if they scrapped any bath panels, me and Dylan asked for the bath panels because we sold them as sledges. So nice. We, at that point in time, we were known for having the fastest sledges in Clayton, where we were brought up until I was 13. But they were the bee's knees of sledges at that time in life.
Yeah, it sounds fairly technologically advanced for a sledge back in those days. But clearly, you had that entrepreneurial spirit from very early on then. And what was your experience of, you know, this is now your full-time position, this is your career, moving from school, going into the family business? At what sort of level would you say you entered the business, and what was your experience for the first sort of few years of working through the positions?
Ground up, really.
Yeah.
I spent, and obviously I'd spent time working in the school holidays. So yeah, I left Fiberlight Christmas '92. and I probably had enough attitude at that point to sink Skipton. So I worked my notice, and I grafted right up until end. But when they asked me why I was leaving, I actually stated that I didn't like any of the managers, as they called them, and I had no intention of working for them any further than a day longer than I had to.
Okay.
So, but I enjoyed my time at Fiberlight as a whole, and I left Fiberlight and they asked my dad for a job, and he said no. So I thought, oh, I probably should have asked for a job before I handed my notice in at Fiberlight. And I'll always respect my dad at that point for his decision, because he just said, we're not busy enough. So the only reason you would be coming to MPM right now is because you're my son, and that's not good enough reason. So fortunately for me, and unfortunately for Dylan went to work at MPM straight from school. So Dylan was already established at MPM, but he got rushed into hospital with internal bleeding. Because I'd worked in school holidays from about the age of 10, my dad already knew I could do the job. So effectively, I nicked my brother's job.
All right.
And by the time Dylan was well enough again, we were busy enough, and I'd firmly established myself at MPM.
Okay, so that worked out quite well for you. Now, I might have missed something here, but how come you didn't join MPM straight after leaving school? How come you went to Fiberlight instead of going straight to MPM?
I think it was just to experience something different, and I knew MPM.
Yeah.
Just from school holidays and everything with my dad. And because I'd done the work experience, and they said, you know, you can come. Effectively at Fiberlight, they used similar materials, but the technology was almost a step up for where MPM was. So it gave me an insight into another manufacturing business and some other composite and GRP production, and just sort of probably gave me a little bit more rounded view of how not so much a business, because I was just at shop floor level at Fiberlight.
Sure.
It gave me another view of how I'd like a shop floor structured almost, and then how I'd like a team structured. And there's probably part of that where it's probably part of bits of hierarchy that I don't like, because, you know, there was one particular supervisor, and he was just a bully. And it's probably that where it stems from, as wanting everybody to understand the shift that everybody puts in.
Yeah.
So no, anybody could throw it back at me and say, you talk about team all the time, but this, but that. Well, you know, I don't mind those challenges, because I would like to think that I could answer those and sort of give a rounded view of how we work at MPM. But I see other elements of team being spoken about, and I think I'm not so sure.
Okay.
And I swept the floors. I've been and done shop run. Although my brother was slightly more entrepreneurial with that, because Dylan used to keep everybody's change, where I were a little bit too I were a bit too process driven, and that's right, and here's your change. Whereas Dylan would just go, I can keep your change because I went to shop for you.
Nice. I like his style, and we'll definitely come on to that dynamic between you and your brother and your father in the family business. There's some interesting questions there. But so from what it sounds like to me, that sort of step into Fiberlight, you almost treated that like a reconnaissance mission to find out what you could learn, knowing that eventually you were going to come back to MPM. So that seems quite, you know, forward thinking for a young teenager at the time to have that sort of mindset.
Yeah, look, I mean, for me, looking back, things like that, it's, you know, it's nice of you to say so. For me, it was just, I probably had a similar ethos to my dad, where it would just get on with it. And for 99, and it's one thing I don't understand now. I know that I don't like the phrase work-life balance. Just don't like it. Life's life. When I'm here, I'm spinning on this planet at a certain speed. And when I go home, I'll still be spinning at same speed, breathing in and out. So I think life is all about balance. I don't get the work-life bit. But you really struggle to get people to do overtime as much. Whereas when I went to Fiberlight in 1992, I averaged 16 hours overtime every week.
Yeah.
And, you know, for the first 6 months, I lived up near Malham. Now, if anybody knows Malham and the Yorkshire Dales, you get about 3 buses a day.
Okay.
So if I wanted to start work at 6 o'clock in the morning, I just had to get on my bike and cycle 10 miles. And I'd get up, I'd set off to work at 5 o'clock, I'd cycle 10 miles, I'd do my shift, finish at 4:30 and cycle back home.
Yeah.
And do that 5 days a week, and then a Saturday morning. Whereas there's an element now where you've literally almost got to twist somebody's arm to do some overtime, and I'm like, where's your goals? Where's your ambition? What holiday are you saving for? What are you going to do about a car?
Yeah.
You know, it's and I love the famous line, it's pointless doing overtime, taxman will take it. No, he'll only take £7. He'll take that percentage. You will be better off. No, I won't. Okay.
Yeah. And that's something that you mentioned a few moments ago, in terms of starting from the bottom and working your way up through the business. You were sweeping the floors, going to fetch the teas, etc. I think sometimes that's maybe an element that puts people off from joining the family business. As you've already said, you know, they've probably had experience in the summer holidays doing those sort of jobs. And when it comes to picking a career, they think, well, if I'm joining the family business, I'm going to have to, you know, work my way up from the bottom, and I'd rather go in at a higher level. Now, I know that's something that you believe in, starting your way at the bottom and working your way up. What benefits has that brought about for you being in the position that you're in now, compared to somebody who might just be given a leadership position because they're a member of the family without having that prior experience?
I think it can be dependent on the sector and what you do. I think for me, it's helped me have a good understanding of how the shop floor works, and I suppose the efforts that your team put in. It makes it a lot easier to walk around the facility and go, why does that look like that? What we're doing about that? That looks wrong, which probably means it is wrong. Whereas the benefits of sort of being almost helicoptered in, you know, it worked for me. I'm not solely you must start at the bottom, but my university years almost were, right, well, I'll make that sacrifice and start at the bottom, and I'll learn by doing. Whereas somebody else that's really suited to academia might go off and learn, you know, put their years in and their debts and everything else for a university and that education, and then they might come in and there'll be some benefits to that, because I'll probably find it harder to delegate some things because I'll just do that myself. Yeah. And it's one of the worst traits ever when you're trying to grow, because you can be the obstacle to growth, because you go, I'll do that. And to this day, that is still something that I have to be quite conscious of. And if you asked at least 5 people, they would still say, yeah, he needs to delegate a bit more. Okay. So, but you're at least you're aware of that, which I think is fairly self-conscious. But I think that's an interesting point, and I think that's something that particularly entrepreneurial family members that have worked their way through the business do struggle with, is that delegation. Because, like you say, it's quicker for you to do it than to try and train and teach somebody else to do it in the way that you want it to get the outcome that you want. But how are some of the ways, even though you feel that you could do it better still, but how are some of the ways that you deal with that now? So when you do feel like it's something that you could just quickly do yourself, but ultimately for the growth of the business, you know, you need to have your focus elsewhere and you need to empower your team to do these things. Do you have any sort of particular systems or frameworks or mindsets that you consciously put in place to help you become better at that? I think mindset wise, I've worked on my self-awareness. Yeah. I was very fortunate to meet a business coach called Patrick Crayford in 2009, 2010. And there were times where I had 100% thoughts of, I'm not sure why I pay this fella every month.
Okay.
Because he's like proper rinsing my brain, and I feel about that big sometimes.
Okay.
And that's not, Patrick was excellent, but I could feel that big.
Yeah.
I'd end up feeling that I was 6 inch taller when the penny dropped.
Yeah.
And so I've tried to work on the self-awareness, and I'll always try to gather feedback from people that I respect, that I feel will give me honest feedback, and that I can work on to lift my own game.
Yeah.
The other tactics is just bite through your tongue sometimes. When I've sat there thinking, I know the answer to this, but I need to let them run with it.
Yeah.
And I think it is just a constant working of that awareness, like, right, hang on, it's going to be catastrophic in a minute because somebody's going to launch themselves off this cliff and there's no safety net.
Yeah.
There's times where I don't believe I'm perfect. I don't believe the world's perfect, and I believe that there will be mistakes. Sometimes it's just how you bounce back from that, whether as a team or an individual. So I think it's being quite conscious of it, and over the years, it's probably one of those of doing, a list of the tasks that take up most of your time, a list of the tasks where you feel most in flow. And I probably pinched that line from a book called Relentless. And that were a great book because based on Michael Jordan and his coach, it were really nice and refreshing to read a leadership book that said, basically, you do want to win, end of.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with it.
No, I think there's, in context of short snippets, the Simon Sinek video on, the infinite game, blah, 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 and not winning. I'm like, no, I'd have to disagree with that. I think in context of a bigger conversation, we might agree on something, but just to have it in a short 5-minute video of, it's not all about the winning. It's like, well, go tell Roy Keane or Lewis Hamilton or Cristiano Ronaldo and, so on and so forth. There's a time where I think you should chase down everything that you want.
Yeah, that's definitely one of, if I had to pick a top 10 of books, Relentless is on there. There's 3 types of people he talks about in that book. There's the sweeper, there's the cleaner. I can't remember what the last one was. What would you put yourself as? I think, was it the sweeper, the guy who is just focused on winning and will do anything to get there, and is literally, like the title of the book says, relentless?
No, a lot of people would potentially perceive that.
Okay.
But I've recently done a diagnostic with another coach on sort of the, what's it called, TEIQ. So it's all around the emotional intelligence. And one of my higher scores was all about almost managing situations for other people's emotions and happiness.
Okay.
But one of my lower scores was my own management of stress sometimes. So people wouldn't see it potentially externally of me, where I'll be conscious of everything that's going on around me, but I can still look like I'm just going to ride over everything to get to what I want sometimes. And again, I think that's where the self-awareness has got to come in. You need to be working with good coaches, looking at personality diagnostic profiles. First time I ever did that with Patrick, like, that's not me. And then we spent some time going through it, and I'm like, oh yeah, that might be me. And I think, that's, again, that can all be hidden with leadership sometimes, because you'll make certain sacrifices that you're not going to tell anybody else about, and you don't particularly want any praise or fanfare about. But we as human beings, we can all look for the negatives more than the positives sometimes. And what's up with him? And I had part of that last year. 2021 probably the toughest year emotionally in my time since taking over in 2010. And you know, I've took some feedback from the team, etc., etc. But there were some bits that I probably were at that relentless point where it just like, I can't fluff it up, guys. I cannot stand here in a team meeting and effectively be losing 6-0 and go, well done, played a good game there. You know, what sucks. And if we're getting hammered 6-0, I need to do something about it. So I'm not one of these people that can stand in front of you all with a big smile on my face going, yay, we're doing really well. No, we're not. We're doing rubbish.
Yeah, there's quite a few points we'll go into there. The first one I wanted to start with, that time back in 2009 when you first started working with, was it Patrick, the business coach?
Yeah.
Was that something that your father had always done, had just been part of the business and he brought you in to work with him as well? Or was there like a sequence of events that led you personally to think, I need somebody to help support me with this? What was the sort of chain of events that led to Patrick coming into the business and working with you?
I suppose I'd love to give you the PC answer and the rosy answer, but I'll give you my honest answer.
Okay.
Don't really know any different.
Oh, that's what we're here for.
I always found the time within the family business hard work. We had quite different ideas. I was looking back at that period of time between 93 and you'd like to think that I learned over years, but probably heading into 2000s, my communication, looking back, was still poor. And, you know, to be honest, looking back, if I was in my dad's situation at that point, I probably would have sacked me.
Okay.
Because the emotion that was involved with a family business when you wanted to do different things and you wanted to do things at a different pace, and there were things that needed dealing with that I would have had no idea about at that point. And I think we got to a point where I wanted to understand and know more about business, and there were probably a few things as I started digging into it where I wanted to do it even bigger or even more different really to what my dad wanted to do.
Yeah.
So that became an extremely trying time because of that emotion that was involved at the time, and it was quite hard for my mum, and my mum always saw it from a family angle, in my opinion, not as much a business angle. And like I said, my dad probably gave me too much rope. He probably should have given me less and just let me hang myself. Not in a literal way, that would be wrong. No. And so I ended up going to or booking a free half day with a business coach. And at that point, I didn't know it was Patrick. So at that point in time, my dad's opinion was, and we looked into a diagnostic with on the business with somebody else. And my dad's opinion at that time, when he put the proposal together, was, I've been running this business for 32 years. Who the hell's he to tell me how to run my business?
Yeah.
I get that to a degree, because there might be times where I'd have had that opinion myself, but for the business to grow, we were in a position where we'd probably evolved, and then we were there, and then we did a bit more. And I know Patrick always put it in 7-year cycles and said, you know, you think that MPM's 30 odd years old, but you're probably just in your 4th or 5th cycle, and you've got glass ceilings to break through. So I went and did half a day with Patrick, and I'm pretty sure I was with my dad. I don't think my dad right enjoyed it, and I loved it.
Okay.
And I came out of the session, and I pretty much discovered that I knew everything there was to know about MPM, and absolutely sod all about running a business.
Mm.
And so again, there was some other parts that we'd sort of discussed. There were some other parts within the business that I'd sort of shuffled around and finding out more and more information. And eventually I said to my dad, you know, either, and again, looking back, was it the right way? I'm not sure it was. Did it get the result and push things over the line? Yeah, it probably did.
Okay.
I did say, we've got 3 choices. So obviously, to which my dad said, well, what's these choices? I said, well, you can either give me a pay rise. I said, or I'll sacrifice that pay rise, but you pay for business coaching because I want to learn what I don't know.
Yeah.
Or I leave. But I'm not bothered which one it is, but it does need to be one of those 3. And
how much attachment were you equally attached to all 3 of those? Was there one that, like, if he had chosen option 3, you leaving the business, would you have gone with that? Would you have followed through with it in terms of how you felt at the time?
Oh yeah, 100%.
Wow.
I wouldn't. It wasn't a threat, but I'm not one to stay. I'm going to do something, and sometimes to my detriment. Where
okay.
if I say I'm going to do something, generally I'll see it through.
Yeah.
And I think there's an acronym for it, but I think, let's say, if it's detrimental, then it's a stupid acronym. But you know, a good leadership trait is do what you say you're going to do.
Mm.
I was particularly tied to wanting to have business coaching.
Yeah.
Because I thought that could benefit everybody.
Yeah.
Whereas,
and do you still work with a business coach now as well, did you say, or coaches at least?
yes, at different times. I think
yeah.
I'll will pick and choose.
Yeah.
I have to get on personally. I can't work with somebody can push me basically. How did Patrick describe it once? You're best off with a transitional coach, not a transactional one that just talks KPIs to you and metrics and everything else. And I love KPIs and data.
Yeah.
But if it's fundamentally just based on, just don't work for me. If it's, you know, if working with Patrick, like I say, I'd leave some sessions and think, I don't know what happened in that 2 hours. No idea why I feel like I do. And I met one of my closest friends through business coaching, Fiona Keane, and Patrick's no longer with us, but we still have conversations and say, oh, do you remember that? Or I was doing that this week, and all I could feel were, you know, Patrick on my shoulder going, no, you just need to do it that way, Ben. You just remember what you've done, remember what you've learned in the past.
And what's the reason that you still work with, again, depending on what your requirement is at the time and who you feel could have a good relationship with? Like, what do you get out of those coaching relationships as a leader in the business?
I think it's good headspace. I think it can give a sort of almost a different sort of third external perspective on the business. You know, I have a lot of love, obviously, and bias for what the team do and the progress that we've made as a business and a team. But if you become too insular, you know, we're all going to sit at home and go, I've got a lovely house, mate. I like my house. You know, you could get 10 other people come in and go, that's a bit tatty, and why haven't you done that? And why have you not got a 72-inch screen? So a business to me is no different, really, unless you going out and maybe doing a factory tour or, you know, listening to other business people speak. I really enjoy my sort of involvement with the Leeds Manufacturing Alliance, because I try to limit what's in my diary. I'm not a massive social person, so you know, I enjoy my home life. So I keep as many diary appointments outside working hours to a minimum.
Yeah.
But with the Leeds Manufacturing Alliance, you get a good insight into what other businesses, their stresses, strains, and everything else. And like I say, when I feel the need to do some work internally on myself, looking at my own performance and leadership, then I'll call on people that I've worked well with in the past and just sit down and go through that. You know, I was part of like a board group, like a Vistage or a alternative board, and I did that for a year. And the morning that I announced that I was leaving the group and resigning from the group, everybody was sort of baffled, but I was like, I don't smile anymore when I'm coming.
Yeah.
You know, this last session, we spent 2 hours discussing an HR issue. I said, at the time, I think we were about £2 million turnover. I was like, I've got an HR person. That's not discussing strategy for me. That's just discussing a challenge that it's relatively simple to deal with, as I thought at the time.
Yeah.
So the group was, you know, fantastic, but I'd stopped enjoying it, or driving away going, I need to do that, or we need to do that at MPM, or yeah, I need to work on myself a little bit more here. So I like I say, I'll call on people that I know I can work with and respect when needed. And no different internally, really.
Yeah.
You know, internally, if you're surrounding yourself with good people, then you're going to take things from that. We've been fortunate enough to bring in Paul Wintersgill this year onto the board, and he was our accountant for 8 years, so he knows how I work, he knows how my brother works, he knows business, but he's still challenging stuff left, right, and centre. And if he wasn't, I think we'd both be bored. So, you know, and like I say, I'll ask for feedback minimum twice a year, normally once a quarter, just right. And that's why I know I still need to delegate stuff, because when I asked for it a month ago, what was one bit of feedback was, seriously, stop trying to take everything on. Sometimes just give it to other people because they just want to help.
Well, there's that saying, isn't it? I find myself saying it quite a lot. You can't read the label when you're inside the jam jar. It's always easier for somebody else to see where your blind spots are. You can't see your own blind spots. So to have somebody being able to provide that outside perspective can really change the game.
Yeah.
And going back to where we started this part of the conversation about, and it's something you hear quite common in family business. You have the younger generation coming into the business. They've got all these ideas. They want to take it to the next level, do things bigger and better. But it's the older generation that have built the business, and it's almost, you know, an attack, not a purposeful attack, but an attack on their own ego and pride. Like going back to that stage, take the business coach out of the equation, knowing what you know now about working in a family business. Is there anything that you would have done differently to handle that situation in a better way?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's I've got kids. I don't know about yourself. But I very, very, very much doubt that anybody has ever come over to you and gone, your kid's ugly. And yeah, pretty much for 10 years, I probably told my dad that his baby were ugly.
Yeah.
And you know, looking back, I can't turn the clock back. And was I happy with the results? Yeah, I suppose so, because it came to where my dad went off and enjoyed his retirement, and we were able to get our teeth stuck into moving the business forward and how we wanted, I suppose. But it was one, we're both extremely competitive.
Yeah.
I do think sometimes that being stubborn isn't seen as a quality. But I think it is sometimes in life, because you'll dig your heels in and you'll sort of see it through.
Yeah.
If you're listening to what other people are saying.
Yeah, I think it's like any strength, isn't it? A strength taken to the extreme can become a weakness. So it's all about each one in moderation.
Yeah. So I think at that point in time, looking at both mine and my dad's personality, I were probably just younger and had a bit more energy to see through.
Yeah.
And it's like I say, we do talk quite a lot now about business, but at the time we didn't speak at all. So fundamentally, that says I got it wrong. And I remember a coaching session with Patrick, and I sat down and me dad this and me dad that, and Alan ain't doing this, and Alan's stopping me doing that, and me dad this, and what the hell's me dad doing, and da 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 da. And he probably let me get it all off my chest, and I just remember him literally chopping me off at the knees and going, "Yeah, it's all your fault." I'm like, whoa, hang on a minute. I just spent 5 minutes telling you every reason that it's not my fault.
Yeah.
Well, have you tried changing your communication? What do you mean? Well, true communication is the response you get. So what response are you getting? Well, one that I don't like. Well, what are you going to change about your communication then? And so we spent probably an hour, because of, in a good way, with a competitive edge, where I felt about that big. And I went, oh yeah, got a bit of work to do, haven't I? And so, like I say, we'll talk a lot more about it now. I think it was Fiona. I spoke to Fiona probably about 6 months ago. We generally speak probably once a week, minimum once a month. But I remember a conversation 6 months ago, and I phoned my dad, who was still stuck out in Spain, and we were discussing the business and everything else. And he said, I can't say how proud I am for what you've done with MPM. And and never in a million years did I see it growing as to what you've grown it to. And the conversation went on a little bit, and I phoned Fiona the following day, and I said, it's probably the worst thing he could have said to me. And she said, what do you mean the worst thing he could have said to you? I said, because I'm sort of done. I said, because I always did it to set another benchmark that my dad would go, MPM's at that level now. And I started that and the foundations of it. And I said, but the competitive edge in me, I almost felt like he'd switched my light off, because I didn't have anything to prove almost. That can be a good thing and a bad thing. But at the time, I was conscious enough to ring Fiona just to speak about it and sort of turn it over. And she said, well, just go do it again. Make sure in 6 months he's saying, I'm really proud of what you've done with MPM. And it was quite an insightful conversation, because fortunately my self-awareness kicked in and went, oh, wonder why I feel like that. And so then I'd go back to all the books that I've read and everything else, and coaches that I've worked with, and and it was one of those moments in time of another insight into why personality profiles and diagnostics work, because I could instantly go, oh yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like a classic case of that. It's not the outcome that's the most important thing. It's the process. Because quite often when you get to where you want to be, you realize that you don't actually feel that fulfillment that you'd hoped for. And it's about continuing that process of striving for more. So since you've had that conversation 6 months ago, do you feel that you've been able to turn your light back on?
Yeah.
What did you have to do to flick it back on? What was it?
I think probably the realization that we were heading in the right direction, and I think I just had to sort of sit down and go, right, that's great, but I can't rest on laurels or become sort of complacent, because it'll come crashing down. And when I'd sort of set the benchmark of, well, we're going to do this and do that, and then that insight into my own emotional process, and my dad just saying that, they were like, well, almost in a positive driver for me. I know some people would see it as negative, but it was like, well, forget complacent. He said that 6 months ago. There's no way I want him telling me I'm on umpty in another 6 months.
Yeah.
Because if it's all come crashing down and I've got complacent just because my light's gone out, I've got a full team, you know, reliant on our customers, and our customers are reliant on what the MPM team does for them. And it's been, you know, and again, the whole history of MPM, it's that the whole takeover time was quite difficult. I know when myself and two brothers took over, me, Dylan and Sid sat down, the first thing I'd put together were roles and responsibilities. They were like, right, if I'm, you know, and giving it titles, but if I'm MD, you're doing that, you're doing, yeah, right. Fundamentally, do you want me to hold that position? Yeah, 100%. Right, great. Well, that's what I'm accountable for. That's what you're accountable for. That's what you're accountable for. Work stays at work, and family stays family, and friends, and that's it. Because there is going to be times where I'll either challenge it or I'll have tough decisions to make.
Yeah.
And it's that bit was quite hard. Then we had our best year ever in 2017. Both from a turnover point of view and a profit point of view.
Yeah.
We'd just had the meeting with our accountant, which was actually Paul, who's FD now, but we'd had a meeting at his office in Ilkley. Pat on back, great job, well done. What we're going to do next, that's massive. And that was February 2018. Myself and Dylan were driving home at the time. I said, what we're going to do? And Dylan just said, that's last year. And neither of us are that good at celebrating. So we were like, well, that's last year. We've got this year to sort out now. So let's just crack on with this year and make this year a good year. And then about 6 hours later, we got a phone call to say that the building was on fire. So the building burnt to the ground, and we lost everything, every mould, every bit of machinery, the lot. We rebuilt back up in 2018. I think we were only 7% down on 2017's turnover figure. My youngest brother unfortunately passed away February 2019. So that was 2019. And then March 2020, COVID hit. And then 2021 was probably as uncertain and horrific, with everything coronavirus wise, and the raw materials market was just berserk. So in my thing of, right, what switches you light on, there's various things, but in any given down day, I can look at the last 12 years and go, yeah, we're all right. Today can't be that bad. Just get on with it. And that probably all encompassed 2021 with the emotional roller coaster. And I told everybody I was ready for Christmas. Anybody that had listened, start of December, can't wait for Christmas. Factory shuts, customers shut, can go home, switch off. When I came back on the 5th of January, in hindsight, on the 5th of January, I was like, oh, that's what burnout feels like. Didn't realise it at the time, but in December, that were it, I were cooked. And just that little bit of a rest and that's probably aided me at the start of this year to go, that's important, but so is that. And you need to make sure you've got your rest, and you can't take on the world. And yes, you need to delegate those three things, and again bring some other people on in the team.
Yeah. And have you felt that shift in mindset to delegating, to making sure you look after yourself as well as looking after everybody else, has made you a more effective leader of the business?
I suppose if Fiona ever watches this, she'll laugh at this bit, because she'd just go, you can't blow your own trumpet. And that to me, it would be for other people to say.
Okay.
I don't really see it as.
What do you think other people would say?
I know Jade would say, delegate more, give me more to do.
Okay.
But that's just because Jade will tell you how it is. I think they'd all say they're seeing a calmer, more assured side, because we've dealt with some of the issues from last year.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm probably working in a slightly calmer environment for my mindset and my personality profile. So a few things changed last year, some good, some bad. But again, I can only look back and go, right, I'll learn from that, and move that forward. So yeah, I think people have probably seen a bit more of the fun element of me back. I'm never going to be, I'm never going to be Pat Sharp running around Fun Factory or whatever it was. It's not my style. But I can stay out of the way in some aspects to allow the growth, because there's a couple of changes this year where you feel like the sunshine's come out, but there's been a bit of shade removed, so they're growing quicker.
Nice way of putting it.
And they're sort of blooming more. So I know that certain people have stepped up, and it's going well, because I go down to the shop floor less. So my default, I can, I'll never be afraid. Last year for 3 months, laminating gear on, rubber gloves, got my resin out, got my bucket and my brush and my roller.
Back on the tools.
Yeah. But, I enjoyed that. And sometimes that's where people don't see stresses and strains of running a business, because the standout thing, if I go back on shop floor, oh, you've come down to do some work for a change then, and I'm thinking, I am finding this so relaxing.
Yeah.
Because I'm just thinking about this job in hand, not what's going on over there or over there. So it works, and it is doing at the moment. Yeah.
Well, I could honestly, I've got about a million questions in my head at the minute, so we could easily go on for another 3 or 4 hours, but we're coming up to an hour, so I've really got to, and I know you've got lots to get on, and I don't want to take up too much of your time, so I've just got to sort of nail it down to the last couple of questions before I let you go. But it's been an amazing insight into the world of MPM and family business, and being a director in the family business. So thank you for being so open and honest. So I'm thinking, in terms of a couple more questions, my first would be, if you could pick 3 characteristics that you think make a good leader in a family business, somebody that started from the bottom, worked their way up, and is now in a position of leadership, be it director, managing director, even on the senior management team. If you could pick 3 qualities that you think have served you well, what would you pick?
Resilience, because the challenges will come.
Yeah,
they won't always come in the form of a fire. But weirdly, I'd take the comeback from the fire over coronavirus, because it was more definite. They were like, right, lost everything, know what we've got to do. Whereas for 2 years, we were surrounded by uncertainty, differing opinions, you know, a different mindset to how we were all going to deal with it and everything else. So the challenges will come in different forms, and I think that resilience is key. I think even with a very successful business, you need a certain level of resilience, because fundamentally there's always going to be somebody that wants to tear you down.
Yeah.
Whether that's competition or not. You know, Simon Sinek's infinite game hasn't got into every business leader. So if you're competition, sometimes your competition will grow teeth. So yeah, resilience would be one. I think persistence, because I think if you've set your course for the business and you're the leader, dealing with your team, it's, you know, it always amuses me with children. And you can watch parents sometimes and they'll go, no. No.
Go on,
yeah,
then.
go on then.
Yeah.
And I think if you've not got that persistence to set a benchmark and a vision, and you stay true to that course and your values and the business values, you're going to be like a blancmange.
Distracted. Well, that's the entrepreneur's curse, isn't it? It's being distracted by shiny object syndrome and not seeing one course of action through until completion. And I see that quite often, and definitely see it in myself in my years in the family business. So 2 good ones so far: resilience, persistence. What would be your third?
I think the other one, and I could probably answer this different every time.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if I'd change first two, but I think you've got to have there's got to be that element of being humble enough to be open-minded, that you're still going to seek out different perspectives and opinions and different ways of, you know, running a business, etc., because as much as what I'm saying, persistence and stay on your course, doesn't mean you shouldn't be, you know, effectively funneling new information in and continuing your own journey. Because if I don't grow with the business, you know, when we took over, it was £500,000 turnover. This year's forecast is 4 million. Well, wow. There's a massive difference between a guy that's running the 500,000 and the 4 million.
Yeah.
There's a massive difference between what your production leader needs to do and be at 500,000 to running 4 million.
Yeah. So your business is never going to outgrow you.
No. So as much as what a business has got to go through, sort of evolving and get through that next glass ceiling, you as an individual will.
Yeah.
And sometimes you've got to work out whether you want to go through it, because just going through it for the sake of it and then realizing that you're unhappy, that's not the place to be. You know, and a lot of people will say, oh, I'd really like his job. What does he do? I don't know. What do you want his job for then? You know, I really want to be a leader. What does leadership entail? Well, I don't know. Well, boil that down first, because you might say that you want that, and then, you know, you might wake up next day and just be unhappy. Not for everybody. Okay,
I've 2 more questions. I said 2 more, but I lied. I've got 1 more afterwards. The last one is a fairly simple one compared to the ones that you've done amazing at so far. Some really amazing, insightful answers. So you mentioned children earlier. Do you mind me asking what you have and how old they are?
Poppy and Luby, so 2 girls, and Poppy's 20, Luby is 18 in June.
Okay, are either of them in the business?
No.
If they were to join the business, and you could reflect on all of your experiences so far, or maybe even if you go back to 18-year-old Ben, when he first joined MPM officially after being at the previous role, if you could give him just one piece of advice after all those years of experience of working your way through the business and leading it with the rest of your brothers and the relationships with the rest of your family, and you could give him just one piece of advice, what would you say to him?
Work on yourself first. Look in the mirror before you start dealing with other issues.
Okay, nice. Okay, and my final one, for anybody that's listening that maybe wants to find out more about you, MPM, follow you on any of the social media platforms, all of the links will be on the show notes over at the website. But have you got any in particular that you're more regularly posting on, either as a business or as you, Ben?
As a business, it's generally LinkedIn and Twitter. For me, I'm not a huge fan of social media, so I'm on LinkedIn personally.
Okay.
But that's it for me.
Yeah.
Other than that, we visit the website. There's a factory tour on there. There's a bit about the business. You got an insight to sort of what we do, what we can offer, everything else. Other than that, I think my email and my contact details are on LinkedIn. So you've probably gathered by now that I'm quite happy to talk about family business. And again, if somebody, I'll often reach out to people because I'll always advise, generally, if you reach out and ask for some help or support, it's very rare that people will say no. So if somebody rang me and said, you know, just thinking about this for business or X, Y, and Z, would you have half an hour for a coffee, or could I come and look around, etc., etc., then normally I would say yes. I can't always promise that it'd be, you know, that day or that week, but
Yeah.
A lot of people have helped myself and MPM on our journey, and I believe in paying forward and giving a bit back. So
yeah, no, that's really, really good mindset to have. So yeah, really kind of you on that. Well, that brings it to a wrap, Ben. Again, I just want to thank you so much for spending some time with me today. It's been a really amazing conversation. There's been so much to dive into, and appreciate you being so open and honest and willing to share your own experiences to maybe help other people that might be going through or will one day go through those same experiences. So wishing you and MPM, you know, the best of luck for the rest of 2022. And I think there's definitely got to be an episode 2 based on all these questions I've still got in my head at some point. So yeah, it's been great to meet you, and thanks so much for joining me on the show.
I'm not so sure everybody else would be happy, but I'd be happy to do an episode 2. I've enjoyed it, Ben. Cheers.
Okay, no, it's good to know. Thanks, Ben. See you again soon.
Thank you.